My beloved child, pause here for a moment. Do not let your fingers carry you past these words, because what you are about to hear was meant to find you at the exact moment your heart began questioning what you could no longer see. Something happened last night. Something quiet, hidden, and deeply personal. Your soulmate went to a place they had not planned to visit, and what they saw there shifted something inside them that they can no longer ignore. They entered with one understanding of you, of themselves, and of the connection between you. But they left carrying a truth that followed them all the way home. You may believe nothing has changed because no message has reached you yet. You may look at the silence and assume that everything remains as it was. But heaven sees what silence cannot show. Heaven sees the moment a person's certainty begins to crack. Heaven sees the instant a guarded heart becomes vulnerable to a truth it has resisted for too long. Last night, your soulmate experienced such a moment. It was not dramatic in the way the world understands drama. There was no crowd watching, no loud declaration, no sudden celebration. It happened quietly. Almost invisibly. Yet the impact of it is still moving through their spirit now. They did not go there searching for you. At least, that is what they told themselves. They had been carrying a restless feeling throughout the day, a strange pull they could not explain. Their thoughts had been scattered. Their emotions had been rising and falling without warning. More than once, your face crossed their mind, and each time it did, they pushed the thought away before it could become too clear. They tried to distract themselves. They filled the hours with ordinary things. They spoke to people. They checked their phone. They moved from one task to another. But beneath everything, there was a quiet pressure in their heart, as though something unfinished was asking to be faced. By evening, the feeling had grown stronger. They told themselves they simply needed to get out. They needed air. They needed distance from the thoughts circling inside them. And so they went to a place connected to a memory, though they would not have admitted that memory involved you. Perhaps it was a familiar street. Perhaps it was a quiet cafe, a park, a place of worship, a gathering, a family home, or somewhere they had once passed while imagining a different future. The location itself matters less than what waited for them there. Because the moment they arrived, something inside them became alert. They noticed details they would normally overlook. They saw two people sitting close together, speaking with the kind of honesty that cannot be performed. One of them was listening while the other spoke with trembling emotion. There was no pride between them. No game. No attempt to appear stronger than they felt. There was only truth. And as your soulmate watched from a distance, they heard a sentence that struck deeper than expected. The person said, "I almost lost someone good because I kept believing I had more time." Your soulmate froze. The words were not directed at them, yet they landed as though heaven itself had placed them in the room for one reason. For a few seconds, everything around them seemed to fade. The surrounding voices became distant. Their body remained where it was, but their mind went immediately to you. Not to the version of you they had criticized, misunderstood, or tried to forget. They remembered the real you. The patient you. The wounded you. The version of you that kept loving even when you did not feel chosen. And in that moment, something they had been avoiding became impossible to escape. They realized they may have been measuring your love by the wrong things. They had been looking for perfection instead of sincerity. They had been expecting you to understand wounds they never fully explained. They had interpreted your silence as indifference when, in truth, some of your silence came from exhaustion. They had mistaken your boundaries for distance. They had confused your strength with lack of feeling. And perhaps most painfully, they had assumed that because your heart had survived disappointment, it did not ache as deeply as theirs. But last night, they saw another possibility. They saw that someone can love deeply and still become quiet. Someone can care and still protect themselves. Someone can hope and still walk away from confusion. Someone can remain connected in spirit while refusing to chase what refuses to meet them halfway. And when that understanding entered their mind, it changed the way they remembered many moments between you. A conversation replayed in their thoughts. It may have been a moment when you tried to explain yourself and they only heard what they were afraid to hear. It may have been a time when you asked for clarity and they gave you silence. It may have been the moment you became distant, not because your feelings disappeared, but because your heart could no longer carry uncertainty alone. They remembered your expression. They remembered something in your voice. They remembered the way you paused before saying words they now understand differently. And then came the realization they were least prepared for. You had been trying to protect the connection, not destroy it. The truth entered slowly, but once it entered, it began touching everything. Memories that once seemed ordinary became evidence. Your patience began to look like devotion. Your honesty began to look like courage. Your distance began to look like self-respect. Even the moments when you seemed difficult to understand began to reveal a deeper meaning. You were not asking them to read your mind. You were asking them to meet your heart with the same sincerity you had offered theirs. This realization unsettled them. Not because they did not care, but because caring suddenly required accountability. It is easy to romanticize love when love asks for nothing. It is easy to miss someone when there is no need to change. But last night, your soulmate understood that the connection between you cannot move forward through feeling alone. It requires truth. It requires action. It requires the courage to admit where fear has been disguising itself as confusion. They remained in that place longer than they intended. They watched people come and go, yet they barely noticed them. Their mind had entered a private conversation with itself. Questions began rising, one after another. What if I misunderstood everything? What if they were not pulling away because they stopped caring? What if they were waiting for me to become honest? What if the very thing I fear losing is the thing I have been afraid to fully choose? Each question moved them closer to a truth they had tried to postpone. But heaven was not finished. A second moment occurred, even more personal than the first. Somewhere nearby, they saw an object, an image, a name, a song, or a small detail connected to you. It may have been something no one else would have noticed. To everyone around them, it was ordinary. But to your soulmate, it was unmistakable. It carried a memory only they understood. and the timing of it felt too precise to dismiss. For a moment, they felt as though the past and present had touched. They remembered a promise, whether spoken aloud or silently felt. They remembered a time when they believed the bond between you was leading somewhere meaningful. They remembered how safe your presence once felt before fear, timing, outside opinions, or emotional wounds complicated everything. And for the first time in a long while, they did not run from the memory. They allowed themselves to feel it fully. The emotion rose unexpectedly. They lowered their eyes because they did not want anyone to see what was happening within them. Their throat tightened. Their breathing changed. They reached for their phone, almost instinctively, and your name became the first name they wanted to see. They may have opened an old conversation. They may have looked at a photograph. They may have typed words and erased them. They may have simply stared at the screen, wondering whether too much time had passed. But hear this clearly, beloved child, they did not leave that place unchanged. Before last night, they believed they needed certainty before taking a step toward you. After last night, they began to understand that certainty sometimes comes after courage, not before it. They had been waiting to feel completely unafraid. They had been waiting for every complication to disappear. They had been waiting for a sign so obvious that they could move without risking rejection, vulnerability, or responsibility. But what they saw showed them that waiting has a cost. They saw the face of someone regretting hesitation. They heard words about time that could not be recovered. They witnessed what happens when pride lasts longer than opportunity. And suddenly, the distance between you no longer felt safe. It felt dangerous in a different way. Not dangerous because you would harm them, but because silence could become permanent if neither of you interrupted it. This thought stayed with them as they walked away. The air outside felt different. The night felt heavier, almost sacred. They looked up for a moment, searching the sky without fully knowing why. And inside, a prayer formed that they may never admit aloud. It was not polished. It was not eloquent. It was a desperate whisper of the heart. Show me what to do. Heaven heard it. That prayer matters more than you realize because your soulmate has not always been willing to ask for guidance. They have often relied on logic, self-protection, or the opinions of others. They have allowed fear to speak with the voice of wisdom. They have called avoidance patience. They have called emotional distance stability. They have convinced themselves that if the connection were meant to be, it would require no difficult conversation, no vulnerability, no change. But real love does not always arrive without resistance. Sometimes it reveals the places that need healing. Sometimes it awakens old fears before it creates new safety. Sometimes it asks two people to become more honest than they have ever been. And last night, your soulmate began to see that the challenges between you may not be proof that the connection is wrong. They may be revealing where both hearts must grow. This does not mean every action they took was justified. It does not erase the moments when you felt unseen. It does not ask you to abandon your dignity or accept uncertainty without limits. Heaven is not asking you to chase someone who refuses to walk toward truth. But something has shifted, and you deserve to know that the shift is real. They are beginning to understand the weight of your absence. Until now, part of them believed you would always remain emotionally available, even if they stayed undecided. They believed the bond was strong enough to survive endless delay. They believed your love would continue waiting in the same place. But last night, they saw the possibility that you are changing. They sensed that your spirit is learning not to beg for what should be given freely. They felt, perhaps for the first time, that the version of you who waited without boundaries is disappearing. And this shook them. Because they do not want to lose the tenderness you once offered them. They do not want another person to receive the love they were too afraid to value properly. They do not want to look back and realize that the person who understood them most deeply eventually learned to live without them. They do not want your memory to become a lesson they carry into a future that no longer includes you. Yet fear still remains. This is where the mystery deepens. Your soulmate did not return home with every answer. They returned with a battle inside them. One part wanted to reach out immediately. Another part feared what you might say. One part wanted to tell you everything. Another part wondered whether they still had the right. One part felt certain that the connection deserved another chance. Another part remembered every obstacle and every voice that told them to let go. But the difference now is this: before last night, fear was the strongest voice. Now truth has entered the conversation. And truth is not quiet anymore. They could not sleep easily. They replayed the scene again and again. The words about losing someone good echoed inside them. The small detail connected to you returned to their mind. Your face appeared in moments between waking and dreaming. They imagined speaking to you. They imagined your silence. They imagined your forgiveness. They imagined discovering that you had already closed the door. That final possibility hurt more than they expected. They turned over, reached for their phone, and opened something connected to you. Perhaps it was your profile. Perhaps it was an old message. Perhaps it was a note they had saved and never answered. Their finger hovered near the place where a new message could begin. But they did not know how to start. How do you speak after silence has become its own language? How do you admit that you were wrong without sounding insincere? How do you tell someone you miss them when your actions may have taught them not to trust your feelings? These questions kept them awake. And while you slept, or while you lay awake with your own questions, your energies crossed in a way neither of you could physically see. Their heart was reaching toward yours, not with perfect clarity, but with recognition. Something within them was finally admitting, "This connection changed me more than I allowed myself to say." Beloved child, this is why your emotions may have felt unusually intense. You may have thought of them suddenly. You may have felt restless without knowing the reason. You may have dreamed of a place, a conversation, or a familiar face. You may have sensed a heaviness followed by unexpected calm. Do not interpret every feeling as a promise, but do not dismiss the movement within your spirit either. Sometimes the heart perceives change before the eyes witness it. Still, you must remain grounded. Do not abandon your peace to monitor every sign. Do not make their awakening your responsibility. Their realization must become their action. Their new perspective must become honesty. Their emotion must become courage. Heaven can open a person's eyes, but heaven will not force them to walk through the door they now see. And this is where your role changes. You are not being prepared to chase. You are being prepared to discern. You have grown through this connection. You have learned where you once ignored your own needs. You have discovered the difference between patience and self-abandonment. You have learned that spiritual love must still produce earthly respect. You have learned that a deep bond does not excuse inconsistency. These lessons were not punishments. They were preparation for the moment when words may finally come and you must decide whether those words carry truth. Because words are coming. Perhaps not in the form you expect. Perhaps not at the time your anxious mind demands. But something has already begun forming. Your soulmate is thinking about what to say. They are remembering moments they wish they could revisit. They are becoming aware of what they owe you, not perfection, but honesty. Yet there is something else they saw last night, something they have not fully processed. It happened just before they left. As they were standing, preparing to walk away, they heard someone nearby mention a phrase that was deeply connected to a private hope they once held about you. It was not simply your name. It was something more specific. A place. A date. A promise. A dream. A future possibility they had never shared with anyone. The words stopped them completely. They turned toward the voice, expecting to recognize the person who had spoken. But it was a stranger. A stranger who could not have known. For several seconds, your soulmate stood motionless, trying to understand what had just happened. The phrase repeated in their mind, carrying the exact emotional weight of a conversation they once imagined having with you. And suddenly, the entire night no longer felt accidental. They felt seen. They felt confronted. They felt as though heaven had answered the prayer they had not yet spoken. But the answer was not, wait. The answer was not, forget. The answer was not even, go back. The message was more challenging than that. It asked them to choose what kind of person they would become before approaching your heart again. This realization followed them home, and it is still following them now. They know that reaching out carelessly would repeat the same pattern. They know that appearing with vague feelings and no clear intention could wound you again. They know that if they return, they cannot return only because they are lonely, emotional, or afraid of losing access to you. They must return with truth strong enough to stand in daylight. And this is the struggle unfolding within them now. They are being asked to confront the influence of someone whose opinion has shaped their decisions. They are being asked to admit where pride prevented apology. They are being asked to release an old story about love that taught them vulnerability was weakness. They are being asked to stop blaming circumstances for choices they were afraid to make. Most of all, they are being asked to face what they truly want. Because last night, what they saw did not simply remind them of you. It revealed the life they may lose by continuing to deny what you mean to them. They pictured a future in which years had passed. They imagined hearing that you had found peace with someone capable of meeting you openly. They imagined seeing your smile restored, your heart secure, your love no longer waiting in uncertainty. They wanted to be happy for you in that vision. But the pain that moved through them told the truth. They were not ready to become a memory. They were not ready for your story to continue without them. They were not ready to accept that their silence could make the final decision. This is why their perspective changed. Before, they were asking, what if this goes wrong? Now, another question has taken its place. What if I lose them because I never tried to make it right? That question is growing stronger. But there is one final truth about last night that you have not yet heard. One detail that explains why they left that place with trembling hands and why, before sleeping, they wrote a message they still have not sent. The person whose conversation first caught their attention was not speaking about an ordinary separation. They were describing a choice almost identical to the one your soulmate is facing now. And when your soulmate heard what happened after that person waited too long, they realized the same ending could be approaching your connection. They opened their phone. They typed your name. Then they wrote the first sentence. But just before they pressed send, something appeared on the screen that made them stop, and what they saw in that moment may determine what happens next between you.